Yeah, I find it that we come from the serpent. We come from some kind of reptilian race, that the origins of humans and the origins of the gods are so much intertwined with this idea of the reptile, the divine serpent. Christianity ended up demonizing it, but for thousands and thousands of years, the serpent was considered a divine representation of God. Even in the Bible originally, the serpent is not spoken of necessarily as evil. This is something that came way later. It's because most religions revered the serpent as being sacred. You find this in Hinduism. You see the Egyptians had the serpent coming out of the third eye on the pharaohs. Native American cultures, all the way from North to South America, talk about the serpents. It's such a reoccurring symbol found in nearly every tradition. Weirdly, who knows why? No one knows why. There's a great book called The Cosmic Serpent you can read that talks about some of this in the context of shamanism. But in the context of reptilians, this is an interesting thing because so many cultures are saying that we come from reptiles.
Are you still a practicing Christian? Sir, and you don't have to answer that. I really want to put you on the spot.
I'd love to. I very much still consider myself a Christian. Today, 2,000 years later, this notion of personal, direct experience of the divine. Something was happening in those centuries to turn this carpenter's son into the most famous human being who ever lived. Something was happening for this illegal cult of a dozen or so illiterate day laborers to convert the entire Roman Empire in only a couple centuries and become the world's biggest religion.
Well, that's also the great mystery that's in your book, too, because the Eleusinian mysteries are going along for 2,000 years, let's say, and then they're disrupted, and Christianity comes along, and there's a hallucinogenic end to it. So what was it about, what happened? Something happened that isn't merely a continuation of the shamanic psychedelic tradition, or that's what you have to think if you're a Christian, but that's also what you have to think historically, because Christianity did do exactly what you said it did. And so that's something I'm very interested in this I'm very interested in Christian ideas. I'm very interested in the continuity of religious experience across tens of thousands of years, and maybe more than that. And I don't understand at all what constitutes the shift that occurs from the transformation from the pagan structures, let's say, predicated as they might have been on hallucinogenic experience, extending way back into the shamanic depths of time. God only knows how long. There's some transformation, though, that's specific to Christianity that's tangled up with the hallucinogen use that I don't understand at all, and that has something to do as well with this idea of the defeat of death and the resurrection of the body, and all of this mystical elements and the hallucinogenic elements of Christianity that are integrated into the Book of Revelation and so on. So there's a pharmacological story, but there's a story of the transformation of religious ideation that also is a complete mystery. Why was Christ able to displace Dionysius, let's say? And what does it signify that was the case?
There was something else that was inspiring people to abandon the faith of their ancestors, perfectly good religion, like Eleusis, by the way, which survives all the way through the early Christian period. The mysteries of Dionysus, a perfectly good religion to the Greek speakers of Greece and elsewhere, that survives before, during, and after the life of Jesus. So,
and you see also these odd correspondences between the development of Christian ideas and the mysteries of facing death that you described that aren't trivial. So Christ is crucified, he dies. 3 days later, he spends time in the underworld, he spends time in hell, he resurrects. That's a death and resurrection story that's very much akin to a shamanic death and rebirth. And it's hard to believe that those ideas aren't in some manner integrally related, especially given that that's something that can be experienced as a consequence of chemical transformation. And then the next question is, what the hell does it mean that sort of thing can be initiated in people repeatedly and reliably as a consequence of chemical manipulation?
But I do think that there is a way to access information beyond what we've taken in our own temporal existence through our own five senses.
In some ways, I really find that compelling, the notion that information is already there. and you're simply just moving the attention of your mind to different parts of that.
Yeah. I mean, we have that with the radio. I mean, you got a frequency, you turn all this information. You
right.
could actually say right now, in the space between us, we have the whole world's knowledge that's up on the internet.
Yeah.
It's right here.
Yep.
But
We
we don't
just have
see
to
it.
tune in.
Yeah.
The experience of the psychedelic realm is more vivid than regular life, which is real strange, because it doesn't feel like you're on a drug, because you're still you. That's another part of it. It doesn't change like when you're drunk, it changes the way you think. Like you think different. This is not that. This is like you think the same way, but you're being confronted with something that's insanely alien. Just alien to everything that you know to be true. And then there's all these things around you that seem to be alive, and they seem to be talking to you and communicating with you. The last time I did it, was a bunch of jokers that were giving me the finger, like jesters. Gestures with, like, they have the little bells.
Yeah.
They were all like shaking and giving me the finger and like spinning around, like going, "Fuck you." They were mocking me.
It
Yes.
opens up the possibility that religious experience or spiritual realities are a part of our basic nature as humans.
Well,
And
but it's worse than that.
That calls into question the validity of all the religions. It's so
Well, I think it's worse. I think it opens up the possibility that they're correct.
they're correct. They have just defined it in their own
Well,
manner.
yes. But I think the idea, this might be my own personal peccadillo, but I think the idea that there's something in the central religious doctrine that's fundamentally correct is much more terrifying than the idea that there isn't. That's how it looks to me. I mean, if there's something divine and immortal about human beings, and it's our ultimate ethical responsibility to let that shine into the world, and that's part of reality itself, then, heaven help us when we don't manage that. That's how it
Yes.
looks to me. And
Yes, absolutely.
I've heard Freudian criticisms of religious belief, for example, that the belief in life after death is nothing but a myth that's designed to, what would you say, keep us in childhood denial of the terrible realities of our of existence. But, that doesn't really account for the prevailing stories of hell, let's say,
Yeah.
because if you're going to invent a religion that does nothing but satisfy your childish delusions, why would you bother with hell?
One interesting point about that has to do with ketamine, which is, been approved esketamine for depression, but it's used for anesthesia. And roughly 1/10 the anesthetic dose is a psychedelic dose. But as the operations get over and then people metabolize the ketamine, there's a process that they call the emergent phenomena. It's like as you're emerging from this tranquilized state, and that's where you pass through the psychedelic phase. And they don't prepare people for that. And what we see is that a lot of adults have difficult times with that. But children don't seem to have those problems. Children are a little bit more already in this kind of state.
That ketamine shit is a weird one because a lot of people do it recreationally, and apparently they blast off and go into other dimensions and shit, and they go into K-holes. And
Yeah, I never did it. I never tried it.
what is ketamine like after a catastrophic injury like that? Does it relieve the pain? Does it just put you in another dimension?
So ketamine is an MDA.
Pull this sucker right.
Yeah.
Just
And ketamine is an NMDA antagonist in the brain, so it essentially is a dissociative. So the way that it feels, because we learned this in class as a medic and everything, but the way that it feels is kind of, it takes your perspective, and it's like, it always felt like a whirlwind if I was getting a push of it. But it's like you're starting to get your vision masked, and you're still there, but you're dipping into like subconscious, because you're still conscious. Because unconscious would mean that you're like, you pass out and you cannot have a gag reflex depending on how unconscious you are. So ketamine, I would close my eyes and immediately trip the most insane balls that you could imagine, and open them, and I'd be back in the room and I'd be like, what the fuck?
Whoa.
And then a friend of mine, when I left my first rotation, he was an Air Force CCT that got blown up in the same village I had a few casualties in. he stepped on ID. He's an above the knee, some missing fingers. But when he was on ketamine, when he was awake and looking around, he'd see the walls on fire, and then there'd be like women, like white pale skin in the corners, peeling the skin off their back, and he was like awake. And I was like, dude, that's
shit.
like whatever. I don't know. It must be like someone's psychology when they go in, like set and setting type thing.
You said just moments ago that we co-evolved with mushrooms, and so what? Can you elaborate on that a bit? What do you mean?
Well, they certainly precede us. Plants go back about 470 million years. If you talk to Paul Stamets, he will say there's a fossilized mushroom that's 2.5 billion years old. So the mushroom actually far precedes the plants that we know of. 391,000 species, 80,000 of which might be edible. This is in orders of millions of years before us. And let's just think about it commonsensically. If we weren't made to interact with our environment, why would these plants have an impact on us? Why are we equipped with CB1, CB2 receptors? Why are we equipped with the 5-HT2A receptor? Why do these things have any impact on us whatsoever? It seems that we've co-evolved together with our planet, and just maybe we're not aliens to it, but together these things are more allies than foes, in some cases, poisons though they may be.
Yeah, well, that's the question. Are they allies or foes?
Yeah, there's a quote from Carl Jung from just a few years before he died. What he says, and I'll just paraphrase it, is that we need to understand psychology. We need to understand who man is, that the greatest danger to us is man. There are no other dangers, really, that impact our species. And then he goes on to say that we are the source of all coming evil. Now, this was 15 years or so after World War II. But yeah, and I'd say one of the most important psychedelic experiences of my life was a DMT experience. Also, Terrence was there. And this is where this kind of intellectual honesty, I guess you could say. I just thought, well, if I'm part of everything and everything's part of me, then it's not just the good parts, that Hitler's part of me too.
Yeah.
And that was just this shock, like a stone sunk, and I just was very moody for the whole next day. But it was that acknowledgement that each of us carries these potentials, and what we activate is what matters, but what our potential are is the whole full range of things.
The mushrooms want you to like them. And so the first time you do it, they're going to welcome you. The mushroom's going to talk to you. We'll help you. And then one day they're going to trick you into taking a large dose, and then you're going to meet the aliens. Then you're going to realize that this dimension that we live in is connected to neighboring dimensions that are accessible through certain psychedelics. And then once you see that, you can never unsee it. It's regular life loses its seriousness. It loses like 20% of its seriousness. It's still serious, still regular life, but 20% of it goes away forever, because you know that that's possible. You know that these other worlds exist, and that other people are just out there running through their entire life from birth to death, and they never experience those worlds. And that's weird.
One of them, Grace Scott, offered us a preview of the future.
If you had told me before I went to Peru and worked with ayahuasca, if you had asked me whether telepathy was real, I would say, well, I don't know because I've never experienced it. But to have it happen to me, all I can tell you is that my experience of it was so true and real and provable that there's no doubt in my mind that that it is possible to have this sort of telepathic connection with other people, because I experienced it 2 or 3 times. And one of the times it was most remarkable was when we went into the ceremony to take ayahuasca. I think it was the first night. It was like 27 people were there, 26 people. And there was a woman that came in. She was from Lima. I think she had driven in from Lima. We were in Cusco. We start taking ayahuasca, and it was going to the left. So she was like the third or fourth person to take, take the ayahuasca. And so I was probably maybe 18, 19 in. So when they turned the lights out and when the ceremony started, I could hear people getting sick, and it was just going around the room. And after it came to me, and after I started to get into that, whatever that space is that you go into with ayahuasca, she was making sort of grunting, and it sounded like she was sick, but she was also sounded like she was in pain. And I had this image of her face, turning into a monster where the nose and the lips was stretching out, almost like a werewolf. Like her face was stretching, and she was turning into this beast. And it was as clear as I could see anything in my waking life. It was very clear. And it scared me, it frightened me, and I made note of it just because it was so odd. It wasn't until the next morning, and we'd never talked, because she came in late, and then I didn't see her until the next morning when we had breakfast.
Yeah.
And she sat down beside me, and we started talking, and I wanted to tell her about that vision of her turning into this monster out there. I thought it might be offensive, but before I could even tell her, it was maybe 2 or 3 minutes into our conversation, she said to me, the weirdest thing happened to me when I first started going into this ayahuasca journey. She said, I started to feel my face stretching, and I was turning into, I don't know if she used the word werewolf, but she said she started turning into a monster where the face was stretching out.
Right.
So I said to her, that's an amazing experience, because I actually saw that. And were we seeing that at the same time? And anybody who's experienced the ayahuasca journey, especially with multiple people, there is a frequency that you get to that is a hive mind frequency where all of you are on the same plane.
Yeah, synchronicity is a thing. I mean, no matter how much I fought it for the longest time. I try to be the most skeptical person ever. But once you go into ayahuasca and psychedelics, it's inevitable. It's there. It's a thing. It's been measured too.
It's totally real. It's absolutely,
it's
absolutely real.
It's so hard to grasp for a lot of us, though.
And here's what's so strange is that scientists will say, well, it has to be, you have to be able to replicate it. Well, every single time people take this, they replicate the same experience.
Exactly.